8 Sleep makes a product that is amazing, which I love. It's called the Pod, and it fits around your existing mattress and cools down your bed so you can sleep better. They just released the newest model called the Pod 4 Ultra, which in addition to cooling down or heating up your bed, can even lift up your head when you're snoring so you can breathe better. It's incredible. To get $350 off, go to 8sleep.com/Pacman and use code Pacman. The link is in the description.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. My name is Brittany Page, host of The Page Perspective here on YouTube, and I am your guest host today. I want to shout out David and his team for inviting me back, and I'm looking forward to covering the day's headlines with you all, so let's get into it. We are now fewer than 70 days away from the election here in the US, and in some states, early voting is actually less than 1 month away. We're seeing an increasingly desperate Donald Trump, who seems completely incapable of running an effective campaign against the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz ticket. He's so desperate, in fact, that he's returning to his usual sources of comfort, his go-to sources for mollycoddling, where he will be handled with kid gloves and asked absolutely nothing of substance. And yes, I'm talking about Dr. Phil. And listen, as a licensed marriage and family therapist myself, Dr. Phil gives us therapists a bad name. And I'm ashamed that he seems to be, at least for some, the public representative of what a therapist is. Even though he's not a licensed therapist, hasn't been licensed since like 2006. Now his primary job seems to be propping up the worst among us, including Donald Trump. This new interview he conducted with Trump is truly embarrassing. Softballs left and right, handing him talking points, trying to make him look as good as possible. But we know by now that no one can save Donald Trump from himself. So let's go through some highlights. I listened to the entire hour-long interview, so you don't have to. And I want to start with Donald Trump's continued proclamation that God protected him. God saved him from the attempt on his life because, well, God is very concerned about crime in America.
How do you answer that? Why were you spared?
So there had to be some great power, because you just can't say millions to one. I used to say 1,000,000 to 1. It's much more than that, because, again, you have to pull down the sign. There has to be a reason to go right, and I never go right. There's no reason. And not only go right, it's for about 1/8 of a second. It's not just right. It's out of all the time that we're on this planet, it's 1/8 of a second, right? So I shouldn't be with you. So,
is there a purpose?
Well,
is there a reason you think you were spared?
I mean, the only thing I can think is that God loves our country and he thinks we're going to bring our country back. He wants to bring it back. It's so bad right now what's happening when you look at the crime, the horrible things that are happening inside our country, and it can be solved. It can be solved fairly quickly. It has to be God. I mean, how can you say it's luck when it's, 20 million to 1, okay? I mean, it's just not possible that I was in that position. It's the only position where that bullet could have missed.
And you believe in God?
I do.
You believe God's hand was in this that day?
I believe so, yeah, I do.
And you talk about the country. You believe you have more to do. You weren't done. You were spared for a reason.
Well, God believes that, I guess.
Well, God believes that, I guess. Don't you love listening to Donald Trump speak for God? Many people believe that he does, by the way. He says, God loves our country. He wants to bring it back. When you look at the crime, it could be solved quickly. It has to be the hand of God protecting Trump. In other words, according to Donald Trump, there is no other way that God can interfere regarding these concerns that he has about the United States of America and crime rates other than ensuring Donald Trump wins the election. You know that Anne Lamott quote? The one that goes, you can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people you do. I guess we can apply that here as well. When you've created God in your own image, you claim to speak for him and use his image to prop up your failing campaign for president. And what I love about this line of reasoning in particular is that later in the interview, he takes a critical tone toward President Biden based on comments Biden made when he was considering whether or not to step down. And he said, only the Lord Almighty could convince him to drop out. Watch Trump on this.
I won the election against Biden. I was up by 17 or 18 points after the debate. And they said, you know what, he's going to lose. They went and told him he's going to lose and we're going to change you out. And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. In fact, he said, only God will change me. But so who knows what happened there?
Who knows what happened there, he says, doubting that Biden, I guess, would receive a message from God about whether to continue his presidential campaign while he sits there and tells the world that God's hand is protecting and guiding him because he's the only one who can save America. The grift is so strong with this one. Now, listen, it's one thing, I think, to talk about God intervening to save you. Okay, many people cope with tragic events by looking for ways to make sense of those events. And sometimes they turn to explanations like this, right? That God intervened because there is a larger meaning, a larger purpose. But it's quite another thing to do what Trump did next, which is make a claim about the electoral outcome and what it would be if Jesus was the one counting ballots.
For instance, I look at California. I gave a speech. I had a crowd so big. I said, there's no way I could lose California, but automatically they mark it down if you're a Republican as a loss, that you lose by 5 million votes. I said, 5 million votes? I guarantee if Jesus came down and was the vote counter, I would win California, okay?
Okay, all he needs is Jesus to come down and count those votes, and he's winning California, you guys. In other words, he's not going to win California, you guys. Apparently, Jesus hasn't been counting votes in California since like 1988, since that's the last time the state voted Republican for president. But all of this is scary because of the growing population of Christian nationalists who have been radicalized, who truly believe that Donald Trump is being guided by the hand of God, and that he truly is the only one who can save this country. And there is just so much here that illustrates he isn't someone we should put in a position of power ever again. There were moments during this interview where I think Dr. Phil started to try to inject some humanity into the discussion, particularly related to the assassination attempt, by inviting Trump to stop focusing on himself when 2 people were seriously injured and 1 person lost their life. But even when given the direct opportunity to show his humanity and focus on the impact that this event had on others, he couldn't do it. There was even a moment when Dr. Phil tried desperately to drain even an ounce of humanity out of this selfish buffoon by asking him a simple question about how the attempt on his life has changed him, even going so far as to kind of tee him up with suggestions that he could simply repeat about how it has changed him. And Donald Trump couldn't do it.
Has this changed you? Has it changed your appreciation for life? Has it changed anything about you? Did you hug your kids extra hard? I mean, has it changed you?
A lot of people ask me, and a lot of people say, like, have you developed any fear of, doing this? Like, because being president is a dangerous job. It's much more dangerous than a race car driver or than anything. It's probably the most dangerous profession if you think about it. Just go up and down the list. So you have 46 and numerous left early or got hit. It's a very dangerous job. I never realized how dangerous, but I was at the border yesterday and they were a dangerous place. He allowed it. He and her allowed it to become dangerous. It's a very, very dangerous place. I was doing an interview and Secret Service said, sir, please, no more standing up. They didn't want me to stand up. People, especially with the kind of weapons they have today. People have shots. And, but it's a great job. It's an interesting job. You can do so much good, but it's a dangerous job.
He cannot, even for a moment, display a shred of humanity. He has to immediately pivot to how he's not afraid, quietly asserting what he wants us to believe is strength, and then an artful pivot immediately to the border. But not an answer, by the way, not even a repeating of the answer that Dr. Phil tried to offer up for him about hugging his kids extra hard. And when we look at who to elect to high office, policy is important. It's crucial. We want to elect people who have the right ideas, who will push us forward, who will make changes we want to see. And the kinds of people we elect is also important when it comes to character. People who can admit when they are wrong, update their views when the evidence changes or when their understanding of the evidence changes. People who have humility, who surround themselves with people who make them better and stronger. People who can admit vulnerability and show vulnerability. But Donald Trump, he's a stack of disqualifying character defects in a trench coat. He has absolutely zero of the characteristics that we want to see in a leader. And I guess we can thank Dr. Phil for illustrating this to us yet again. Donald Trump is in full cope and seethe mode over on Truth Social. And if we weren't already concerned about his mental state, this is just further proof that we should all be very concerned. Donald Trump uses his social media a lot like my great aunt Ruth, who used to write on the Facebook wall, maybe I'm dating myself, of Fannie Mae chocolates. And she would say, "I love your chocolates, Fannie Mae," like Mr. Fannie Mae himself was going to see the message and respond. Though that is a very harmless example, given that Donald Trump spreads dangerous, racist, sexist, and unhinged QAnon propaganda and memes. QAnon, of course, referring to the conspiracy theories related to Trump battling against satanic forces controlling the government. And according to Alex Kaplan, a senior researcher at Media Matters, quote, Trump this morning amplified on Truth Social at least 6 different QAnon promoting accounts, a total of 15 times, including amplifying posts from one of them featuring the QAnon slogan and the QAnon phrase, "Nothing can stop what is coming." And then there are several images linked in this tweet showing the posts, which we'll just kind of cycle through right here. We see a few posts that he reposted here from Laura. She has the "Where We Go One, We Go All" acronym as a hashtag in her bio, and she is posting some memes like, "Jackal Smith is a career criminal, a political weapon against America. He should be prosecuted." And then we have another meme here. Donald Trump reposted of hers. "President Trump is 100% innocent. We stand with you, sir." And now it doesn't say with tears in our eyes here, but I guess we can just assume the tears are in fact in the eyes. And the meme continues. "We love and will vote for you this November like we did in 2016 and 2020. They get progressively more unhinged with more references to the QAnon phrase, "Nothing can stop what is coming," "Nothing can stop what is coming," WWG1, WGA, "Retruth if you agree," and Donald Trump retruth, so he agrees. We know that Donald Trump has said that he would seek revenge against his political opponents, and his posts here make that clear. He reposted this photo of Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, and Kamala Harris in orange jumpsuits with the words, "How to actually fix the system," surrounding the photos. He also reposted this photo of Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris with a response underneath that reads, "Funny how blowjobs impacted both their careers differently." I mean, what can even be said at this point that hasn't already been said? This is unbecoming of a president. It's unbecoming of any decent person who seeks any position of power over others. It isn't normal. It's weird. It is unacceptable. And yet many in the media act like Donald Trump is just another candidate who should be taken seriously. Dr. Phil just sat down with him as though he's a serious intellectual person who has nuanced policy views and plans to improve the lives of Americans, rather than a sad, disturbed old man who soothes himself with unhinged memes from conspiracy theorists on his failing website. But I also want to read this part of the Rolling Stone reporting on this meltdown. Quote, a senior Trump campaign official tells Rolling Stone that they are consistently relieved for the sake of their 2024 campaign that the former president's main social media home is now Truth Social, if only because it limits the public reach and media attention that these kind of posts receive, as Trump is trying to appeal to moderate and swing voters in the final months of the election. If Trump were still using X, formerly Twitter, as his primary social vehicle, this official asserts the more, quote, unhelpful posting and reposting sprees would get more public traction and drive more news cycles. So I guess this is something I would turn over to the audience. Are these posts the kind of thing that could sway voters? If swing voters or moderate voters saw these posts, if they were covered widely in the press, would that convince people to then vote for Kamala Harris? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you believe a moderate or swing voter could be convinced by seeing how unhinged Donald Trump is, share this video with a friend. JD Vance has been working overtime to convince all of us that he does not, in fact, hate women who don't have children. Childless cat ladies, as he calls them. The past couple of weeks have given us headline after headline of old interviews and speeches from JD Vance where he attacks women who don't have children. He has said that people in the leadership class in the United States who don't have children are more sociopathic than people who have children. They make the country less mentally stable. They are deranged. They're psychotic. He has a very obvious contempt for people without children, women in particular. Never mind that the people he may be attacking for being childless are step-parents or people who have struggled with fertility or even just straight up people who don't want children. It's none of his business. But it keeps getting worse for him because yet another clip has surfaced and it's making the rounds. And honestly, I can't wait to see how JD Vance tries to clean this one up. I'm going to play audio for you here and I want to set it up. So this is JD Vance making an appearance in a 2021 at a forum held by the Center for Christian Virtue. And according to reporting from Rolling Stone, he is responding to a question, quote, regarding the state's backpack bill, legislation that would expand tax-funded scholarships to private schools and homeschooled students in grades K through 12. You're going to hear JD Vance attack Democratic leaders and also the American Federation of Teachers president. Let's listen now.
And I think our conservative idea is that parents and families should determine what children learn, what values they are brought up with. You know, so many of the leaders of the left, and I hate to be so personal about this, but they're people without kids trying to brainwash the minds of our children. And that really disorients me and it really disturbs me. Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the most powerful teachers union in the country, she doesn't have a single child. If she wants to brainwash and destroy the minds of children, she should have some of her own and leave ours the hell alone.
Now, the president of the American Federation of Teachers that JD Vance attacked there actually responded to this resurfaced clip, writing on Twitter, quote, gross. JD Vance's comments are sad and insulting to millions of modern families and school teachers, including Catholic nuns, none of whom should be targeted for their family decisions. Exactly. So we're adding disorienting and disturbing to the list of words that JD Vance uses to describe people who don't have children, in addition to sociopathic, psychotic, mentally unstable, deranged. This is a pattern over many different appearances in public. This man can continue to try to deny what is a very consistent pattern, but this illustrates his true fundamental feeling toward people who don't have children. And something that I find really striking about this is that, in a way, Republicans are telling on themselves. You know how you'll come across conservatives, whether in person or via their posts online, and you'll see them expressing the view that they don't support student loan forgiveness because, well, they had to pay their way, and you should too. Or that they don't support medical debt forgiveness because, well, they had to endure a horrendous medical bill and they struggled to pay it, so you should too. There are numerous examples that illustrate this struggle to care about or support something unless it directly impacts or benefits them. But many people don't actually operate like this. And this may come as a surprise to someone like JD Vance, but many people care about things that don't directly affect them. People who don't have kids can and do care very much about kids, people with kids, and the future of the country. People who won't benefit from student loan forgiveness, support student loan forgiveness. People who won't benefit from medical debt forgiveness, support medical debt forgiveness. Many people, like me, actually want to decrease the suffering in society, regardless of whether or not my suffering is personally decreased. I want people to benefit from programs that make their lives easier, even if my own life is not made easier. JD, you may want to encourage people to become parents, right? That's what you want. You want to incentivize parenthood. Well, then why don't you spend some time addressing these structural inequalities that make parenthood seem impossible? Pew Research Center, a nonpartisan fact tank, recently published a report on the experiences of adults who don't have children, specifically the reasons that they list for not having children. And if you're watching this and not just listening, you'll see a chart here which separates adults ages 18 to 49 who are unlikely to have children with a yellow bar, and adults 50 plus without children with a green bar. And you'll see on this chart that 36% of adults ages 18 to 49 without children say they can't afford to raise a child, while 12% of adults 50 plus without children say the same. You also have 38% of adults 18 to 49 without children say a reason for not having children is concerns about the state of the world, while 13% of those adults 50 plus without children say the same. Setting aside the fact that JD Vance should just, keep his nose out of other people's business because people have many different and good and individual reasons for not having children, if he were actually interested in creating a world where people sought out parenthood, he would support policies that support parents, paid family and medical leave, universal school meals, a permanent and expanded tax credit. Oh, but wait, he couldn't even bother to show up to vote on the child tax credit a month ago. I'd love to know what you think about this. Please join me in the comments below, or you can head over to my channel here on YouTube where I talk a lot about these same issues, policies that can improve lives. You can find me over there by searching my name, Brittany Page, or you can follow me on social media at Brittany E. Page.
Our sponsor, 8 Sleep, is the creator of the Pod, which can be added to your existing mattress like a fitted sheet to automatically cool down or warm up each side of your bed, and in turn improve your sleep quality dramatically. Meet their newest model, 8 Sleep's Pod 4 Ultra. It cools, it heats, and now it can elevate your head automatically. Pod 4 Ultra can cool down each side of the bed to 20 degrees below room temperature, keeping you and your partner cool even in a heat wave. The Pod can even detect your snoring and automatically lift your head by a few degrees to improve that airflow and stop your or your partner's snoring. There is nothing else like it on the market. I've been using 8 Sleep products for a long time, and it's one of the few things in my house that I couldn't go without now. Pod 4 Ultra also introduces an adjustable base that fits between your mattress and your bed frame to add reading and sleeping positions to help you unwind at night. Go to 8sleep.com/Pacman and use code Pacman to get $350 off the Pod 4 Ultra. The link is in the description.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. My name is Brittany Page, host of the Page Perspective here on YouTube, and I am your guest host today. I'm feeling a little insecure about my voice and whether or not I sound sick because I'm actually COVID positive right now after attending the Democratic National Convention in Chicago last week. Let this be your reminder to book your appointments for your boosters and to continue to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. Thank you for being here with me today. It's rare that we get such a perfect example of Fox News working overtime to protect their audience from understanding reality, but we got a good one today. Everyone's favorite governor and Democratic nominee for vice president, Tim Walz, made an appearance at the Firefighters Union Conference in Boston. He delivered a speech at the 57th International Association of Firefighters Convention, and Fox News actually covered it. We had Bret Baier and Dana Perino, and if you don't know these Fox News hosts, I'll tell you more about Brett Baier after this clip, but he is supposedly on the news side, quote unquote, over on Fox. And Dana Perino, of course, was the White House press secretary under George W. Bush. They were working this hour while Fox News carried Tim Walz's speech. And I want you to notice during this clip, when Brett and Dana, our esteemed hosts, decided it is crucial that they cut in. Tell me if you notice anything about the timing on this. Watch.
Some of you in here, and I'm going to say this because I know we're bipartisan, some of the gray hairs in here, I know what you're thinking, and I remember it too because it's my family. When Republicans used to talk about freedom, they meant it. They meant it. Not anymore. These guys over there, they want government to have the freedom to invade every corner of your life, from our union halls to our kids' schools, even our doctor's office. Vice President and I, we got a little bit different vision of this. We believe that you, not politicians, should be made free to make your own health care choices. We believe that workers deserve to collectively bargain for fair wages, safe working conditions, good health care, and secure retirement. No interference from government.
To Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. He's also the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic ticket. He's speaking to the firefighters union in Boston, Massachusetts. About 350,000 members, Brett, and speaking there enthusiastically without notes, and they really want to get this union vote. I don't know, though, Brett, if the rank and file would agree with him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that this is a pitch, a speech designed specifically for the union. A lot of talk about collective bargaining, a lot of talk about, issues that those union members talk about in those halls.
Interesting. Right when Walz is leaning in with specifics about the Harris-Walz policies and plans, and that applause is going wild, Brett and Dana are popping in to say, hey, now is time for our analysis about how the union doesn't seem to be buying what they're selling. I guess thunderous applause can mean different things to different people. Now, Dana Perino, having worked for George W. Bush, is an obvious partisan when she's not interrupting Tim Walz's speech because it is sounding just a little too good. She can be found as one of the hosts on The Five attacking any of the usual suspects, but often homeless people or other similarly marginalized and mistreated groups in America. While Brett Baier, he loves to spend Thanksgiving at Mar-a-Lago, as you can see here. And he and Trump seem pretty close because here's Donald Trump praising Brett's golf game recently at a rally.
And when you win a club championship, that means you can play under pressure. You can ask a lot of the people up there, like Brett Baier. Brett Baier's a good golfer. Ask him, can Trump play? Ask a lot of the people, but...
So these two people very obviously have their thumb on the scale for Trump, but I want to hear more from Walz. Not just because I am fully Walz-pilled, but because I want both Harris and Walz to win. I think it is crucial that they win, but I also want to hear more from Tim Walz because he's good. He makes the case. He makes you want to support him and take action to support him. So let's hear more from him, this time without interruption from the Trump minions.
Look, I'll keep saying it. Words are cheap. Actions is all you should care about. Make sure you're counting on what was delivered. When Donald Trump was president, he blocked overtime benefits for millions of workers. He opposed efforts to raise the minimum wage, and he even proposed slashing budgets for federal fire service programs. Those are just simply facts. But look, it's not just what they've done, it's what they're gonna do. This is the big thing. One of the goals of their Project 2025 is to screw the middle class, making it harder for workers to collectively bargain, allowing employers to drastically cut overtime or eliminate it, slash taxes for the ultra-wealthy by imposing a national sales tax on the rest of us. Look, I've said this, I'm an old-time football coach. If you draw up a playbook, you plan on using it. Project 2025 is a plan to reshape what America looks like, moving away from the middle class and putting it right back on the oligarchs and the wealthy at the top. He said he's going to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That thing is pre-existing conditions. Those are things that make sure that our family gets health care. And for many of our families, and I know you don't get to participate in it, but your families do, my mom does, Social Security and Medicare are life-saving programs for them. Instead of funding those programs, they talk about cutting them. So here, this is what I always say. If you got $1 billion, you don't give a damn if your Social Security check shows up. But if you're like my mom, that's how you pay for your food. That's how you pay for your heat. That's how things get done. So that check, pretty damn important to protect it.
That is right. This is the energy we need. Reminders that Donald Trump is fundamentally a rich guy who has lived a life of luxury, never wanting for anything, surrounded by a bubble of constant protection. He can't relate to us. He can't relate to you. And when I was at the Democratic National Convention last week getting COVID, I was so happy that they really centered Project 2025 throughout the week. Each day there was a speaker who carried out a massive book and put it on the podium and highlighted a specific aspect of Project 2025 that would harm people, harm us. As Kamala Harris and Tim Walz prepare to sit for their big interview with CNN's Dana Bash, I'm looking forward to hearing more of this. Direct messages about the damage a Trump administration would do and a unifying message we can all get behind. I'd love to know what you think about this in the comments below, or you can connect with me here on YouTube or on social media at Brittany Page. This Arlington Cemetery story just keeps getting worse for Donald Trump and JD Vance. You'd think that after all the reports of Donald Trump disparaging members of our military, he wouldn't want additional headlines drawing attention to his general disrespect and disregard, but here we are. And JD Vance was actually forced to answer for this recent controversy at a campaign appearance, but just in case you haven't been following this one closely, I want to refresh your memory on the series of events here. Donald Trump went to Arlington National Cemetery, as NPR reports, quote, to participate in an event to mark the 3rd anniversary of a deadly attack on U.S. troops in Afghanistan. As U.S. forces withdrew from the country, 13 service members were killed in the attack. The Trump campaign has blamed President Biden and Vice President Harris for the chaotic withdrawal. So basically, he went to Arlington National Cemetery for a partisan political photo op. And then things got complicated. Reading again from reporting from NPR. 2 members of Donald Trump's campaign staff had a verbal and physical altercation Monday with an official at Arlington National Cemetery, where the former president participated in a wreath-laying ceremony, NPR has learned. A source with knowledge of the incident said the cemetery official tried to prevent Trump staffers from filming and photographing in a section where recent U.S. casualties are buried. The source said Arlington officials had made clear that only cemetery staff members would be authorized to take photographs or film in the area, known as Section 60. When the cemetery official tried to prevent Trump campaign staff from entering Section 60, campaign staff verbally abused and pushed the official aside, according to the source. Now, we can picture this happening, right? I mean, this is the same campaign that just brought back Corey Lewandowski. You remember when he was charged with battery after an altercation with a reporter? I know those charges got dropped, but Donald Trump surrounds himself with people who are unhinged. And we already know Donald Trump exhibits a pattern of disrespect to fallen soldiers. And now we have the Associated Press confirming elements of this story. Reading from their reporting, Donald Trump's campaign was warned about not taking photographs before an altercation at Arlington National Cemetery during a wreath-laying ceremony earlier this week to honor service members killed in the Afghanistan war withdrawal, a defense official told the Associated Press on Wednesday. The official spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter concerning Monday's events. It came a day after NPR reported, citing a source with knowledge of the incident, that 2 Trump campaign staff members verbally abused and pushed aside a cemetery official who tried to stop them from filming and photographing in Section 60, the burial site for military personnel killed while fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Quote, federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries, to include photographers, content creators, or any other persons attending for purposes or in direct support of a partisan political candidate's campaign. The cemetery official's statement said, quote, Arlington National Cemetery reinforced and widely shared this law and its prohibitions with all participants. We can confirm there was an incident and a report was filed. Now, Trump's team is reiterating that Trump was there at the invitation of families of service members who were killed. They are denying that a staffer pushed a cemetery official, and they say their team was granted permission to have a photographer. And like I said, JD Vance was given the opportunity to respond to this growing controversy at a campaign stop in Pennsylvania.
Go ahead.
Hi, Senator. Good to see you again. Ali Novello with CBS News. I have two questions for you. One, could you tell us more about the altercation that happened at the Arlington Cemetery? And two, what does debate prep look like for yourself and for Trump at this time?
Well, I think, first of all, the altercation at Arlington Cemetery is the media creating a story where I really don't think that there is one. There is verifiable evidence. There is verifiable evidence that the campaign was allowed to have a photographer there. There's verifiable, they were invited to have a photographer there. There's verifiable evidence that the families of these poor people who had their loved ones die 3 years ago at Abbey Road, Abbey Gate, those 13 Americans, a lot of them were there with the president. They invited him to be there and to support them. That's not an insult to the memories of their loved ones. They wanted Donald Trump there, and thank God that we have a president who stands with our veterans instead of one who runs away from them. Now it is amazing to me that you have apparently somebody at Arlington Cemetery, some staff member, had a little disagreement with somebody, and the media has turned this into a national news story. You know what I think our veterans care a lot more about?
So wait. And sorry to cut in here. The first half of that clip, fully in line with the denials that we're already hearing from the Trump campaign. There was emphasis on the invitation from the families of service members who were killed. There was emphasis on the permission to have a photographer. But then here comes JD Vance with the quote, "You have some staff member at Arlington Cemetery who had a little disagreement with somebody." So, buddy, can we hear a little bit more about that, the disagreement? What exactly was the disagreement? Is it at all related to the statement released by Arlington National Cemetery noting that federal law prohibits political campaigns within the cemetery to include photographers for purposes of a partisan political candidate's campaign? Was the disagreement at all related to that? And I cut him off before he was about to say what he thinks of veterans, what he thinks veterans care more about. And I can tell you what he wasn't going to say. He wasn't going to remind everyone in the room about Donald Trump calling Americans who died in war suckers and losers, or that he likes soldiers who weren't captured, or that the Presidential Medal of Freedom is better than the Medal of Honor because you're still beautiful and alive. So this really becomes a who are you going to believe situation. And I want to play a clip from an interview on CNN with former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark, so you can hear from someone who isn't desperate to defend every single thing Donald Trump does, like JD Vance.
Well, I think it's totally inappropriate that Donald Trump has used that part of Arlington Cemetery that way for a partisan political purpose.
I think that is an important point here. We don't need to get into a back and forth about who has evidence for what. He wasn't supposed to turn this into a political stunt, and he did. And for those of you who were thinking, but what about the invitation from the family members of the fallen? Here is NPR reporter Quill Lawrence on PBS NewsHour with an important consideration on this point.
The rules are in place for a reason.
In one of the photos that's widely circulating and being used by the Trump campaign, former President Trump is with family members of a fallen soldier. But to the left and the right of that soldier's grave, you can see two other tombstones. And it seems fairly clear that neither of those families has given consent for the Trump campaign to use these photographs. And that's incredibly painful for these families. And many of them are still grieving the loss of their loved one.
So again, this seems to fit with Donald Trump's pattern, no? Ultimately, he isn't going to do the legwork to ensure the other family members of fallen soldiers consent to him using these photos in his campaign. He got what he wanted, and he's going to use it to try to prop up his campaign. And people like JD Vance are going to help him do it, no matter the cost, no matter the damage, no matter the harm that it may inflict on others. So again, it comes down to who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe Donald Trump and JD Vance, who seemingly can't go even 1 second in their day without lying? Or are you going to believe the reports piling up about yet another example of Donald Trump's lengthy history of disrespect? I'd love to know what you think about this, so please tell me in the comments below, or you can find me on social media at Brittany Page.
Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com, joinpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am still your guest host, Brittany Page. I host my own show here on YouTube called The Page Perspective, where I talk a lot about politics, policy, and psychology. Feel free to join me over there if you have enjoyed my time here. And thank you for joining me. Vice President and Democratic nominee for President Kamala Harris is preparing to sit down for her first big interview since President Joe Biden stepped aside. And there was a lot of pressure on her to sit for an interview with the media. Her campaign suggested earlier this month that she would sit down and do an interview by the end of the month, the end of August, and she held true to her word and will be sitting for an interview today, Thursday, on CNN with Dana Bash. The interview will air at 9 p.m. Eastern, and since I'm only guest hosting for one day, you'll have to get all those notes from Jesse Dollemore, who is your Friday guest host. Hopefully this isn't like a spoiler situation. Now that this interview is scheduled and happening, I think conservatives are scared. We're starting to see glimpses of this, including how prominent figures in conservative politics and media are responding to her scheduled sit down with Tim Walz by her side and Dana Bash doing the interviewing. Let's start with CNN's own Scott Jennings, who called Kamala Harris's decision to sit down with Tim Walz weak sauce.
Is the line now going to be, well, why isn't she doing it by herself?
Yeah, I do think people are going to bring that up. Look, I have great confidence in Dana and CNN to do this. I think it's incredibly weak sauce to show up with your running mate. The fact that they don't have enough confidence in her to let her sit herself, the actual top of the ticket, and do a single interview. In fact, I think the hand-wringing and the gyrations over this over the last month show a troubling lack of confidence in her political ability, which also makes you wonder as a voter, well, what kind of president would you be if this kind of a small-time decision, can we do an interview or not, what does that look like for your decision-making process, so on? So, yes, I think Republicans are going to think it's pretty weak to show up with effectively someone to take up half the time.
I wonder how many of you are thinking, like I am, if Tim Walz wasn't joining her, would they be complaining about that? I mean, isn't this just another example of how can you win with these goofballs? If Tim Walz wasn't there, they'd be like, where's Tim? Why isn't he supporting her? Why isn't he being open and transparent about his intentions and goals? But aside from that, it isn't unusual for a party's presidential nominee to be joined by the vice presidential nominee for an interview. Here is Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan sitting together for an interview. Is this weak sauce? Is it weak sauce, Scott? And we had another classic example of hypocrisy, this time from Jesse Waters of Fox News. We have a mashup from ACYN on Twitter. You'll see Jesse's current complaints today, followed quickly by a little flashback with two familiar faces.
Her handlers don't even trust her to survive a softball CNN interview. So Coach Walz is going to chaperone tomorrow night at 9. Mr. President, Senator, I don't know what we have to talk about. It's been pretty boring.
Truly, how disturbing is that clip? These people have no shame. And Jesse Waters is fresh off the controversy surrounding his sexist comments about the generals having their way with Kamala Harris. And he has the audacity to use similarly insulting language about Walz being her chaperone for the interview because she can't be trusted to answer questions alone. We know Kamala Harris is a strong, smart, capable woman who does not need a chaperone, but who wants to show America who this ticket is. Tim Walz is a fantastic pick for vice president, and he adds a lot to the ticket, unlike, JD Vance or the one before him, who all of Donald Trump's supporters wanted to hang. But we have another one, another shameless figure in conservative circles, who you'd think after the promotion of her book, where she admitted shooting her dog, Cricket, she wouldn't be interested in making the rounds as a commentator anymore. But no, here she is, Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, providing her own analysis of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz sitting together for a joint interview.
I mean, it's insulting. It really is. So I hope that everybody recognizes that Tim is there to help prop her up. And if it gets awkward or she starts giggling or looking, crazy, that he's going to interrupt and take over. And then they're going to go back and stop the tape and maybe retape that question to make sure that she looks fantastic. This has been something that they have been planning ever since, probably for months. And they know what their game is. I just hope the American people are strong enough and verbal enough and vote enough to call them out on it.
What? Do you love how she's just kind of like petering out there at the end? She's not even sure of what she's saying. And they just have nothing. I mean, again, with the laughing comments, with the giggling comments, Kamala Harris has a beautiful, contagious, genuine laugh. The chyron there said, similar to the theme of all the comments that you've been hearing, that Tim Walz will act as a cover for her incompetence. And this is the typical move when dealing with misogynists, so it's not surprising. Her success is due to a man. They don't like the way she laughs. They don't like the way she talks. They don't like the way she acts. She needs a man to cover for her because she's just not that bright. And Kamala Harris is a black woman. So not only does she get the misogynistic attacks, but she gets the racist attacks as well. It's disturbing. And we know, and they know, that her sitting for an interview alongside her VP is fine, is typical, is expected. We saw Romney and Ryan together. We saw Trump and Vance together. And now we're going to see Harris and Walz together. And I, for one, can't wait to see the conservatives panic even more when Americans continue to support this ticket in greater numbers after seeing what Harris and Walz plan to do for Americans. By now, we know that RFK Jr., who suspended his presidential campaign and endorsed Donald Trump, was just running a campaign out of pure self-interest. And I heard rumblings about his care and concern for the environment and all that, but surely the folks who were making that argument can lay it to rest now, right? I mean, now that he's endorsed Donald Trump for president, a man who believes climate change is a hoax. There were numerous issues with RFK Jr., frankly, the brain worm and the dead bear cub selfie being near the bottom of the list, which is really saying something. But now we're here. RFK has endorsed him. And while endorsing Donald Trump, Kennedy went out of his way to say that his team had polling that showed Kennedy could damage Trump in key battleground states if he stayed on the ballot. In fact, let's hear briefly what he had to say about that specific issue.
I would likely hand the election over to the Democrats, with whom I disagree on the most existential issues: censorship, war, and chronic disease.
I love that he says he disagrees with the Democrats on most existential issues, while he was, just before suspending his campaign, angling for a position in the Harris administration. Truly, I hope we can now see this man for who he is. He really had a lot of people going. But now we're learning that although Kennedy is trying to get his name removed from the ballot in 10 states to help Trump, his plan is not going very smoothly. So far, according to Business Insider, at least 3 states are causing him problems. Quote, Michigan, a key battleground state, said it was too late for Kennedy to withdraw as the nominee of the Natural Law Party in the state. Kennedy got on the ballot by convincing the small party to nominate him, earning only 2 votes. Wisconsin, another crucial swing state, also denied Kennedy's request to be removed from the ballot. Colorado, notably less competitive for Trump than Michigan or Wisconsin, also denied Kennedy's removal from the ballot. However, Kennedy succeeded in getting himself booted from the ballot in some important swing states, including Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. He's also been removed from Florida, Ohio, and Texas ballots. You know how upset Republicans, especially Donald Trump, have been over the Democratic ticket shakeup? Donald Trump has been talking about how it's unfair. Does he also think this is unfair? Kennedy's efforts to remove himself from the ballots where it could hurt Trump. Is that unfair? I think we all know the answer to that. We're in the middle of election season, which for me seems like the only time we hear Republicans talk about the deficit. Is it just me? Does anyone else notice this? When are Republicans talking about how concerned they are about the growing deficits, other than during an election when they're trying to attack Democrats? And Donald Trump, last time he was in office, he increased the national debt, even though he promised, as Republicans always do, to reduce it. And let's just do some refreshing here. Reading from ProPublica, quote, in a March 31st, 2016 interview with Bob Woodward and Robert Costa of the Washington Post, Trump said he could pay down the national debt, then about $19 trillion, quote, over a period of 8 years by renegotiating trade deals and spurring economic growth. After he took office, Trump predicted that economic growth created by the 2017 tax cut, combined with the proceeds from the tariffs he imposed on a wide range of goods from numerous countries, would help eliminate the budget deficit and let the U.S. begin to pay down its debt. Spoiler alert, this didn't happen. And Trump slashed the corporate tax rate and moved to hiking tariffs, which he plans to do again, by the way. We'll get to that in a moment. But the actual impact last time he was in office, reading again from ProPublica, the national debt has risen by almost $7.8 trillion during Trump's time in office. That's nearly twice as much as what Americans owe on student loans, car loans, credit cards, and every other type of debt other than mortgages combined, according to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It amounts to about $23,500 in new federal debt for every person in the country. The growth in the annual deficit under Trump ranks as the third biggest increase relative to the size of the economy of any U.S. presidential administration. And this article is from 2021, by the way. But you can see from this chart that the debt was rising even before COVID. Now we're learning, according to a new report, that we're in for more of the same should Donald Trump become president again. Reading from CNBC, quote, former President Donald Trump's economic proposals would increase federal deficits by $5.8 trillion over the next decade, almost 5 times more than those of Vice President Kamala Harris, which would add $1.2 trillion, according to a new pair of studies from the nonpartisan Penn-Wharton budget model. The Trump report found that his plan to permanently extend the 2017 tax cuts would add more than $4 trillion to deficits over the next 10 years. His proposal to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits comes with a $1.2 trillion price tag, while his pledge to further reduce corporate taxes would add nearly $6 billion. So where are the Republicans on this? Are they concerned, or are they only concerned when discussing Democrats' proposed spending budgets? And should we also be concerned about where Donald Trump's making these cuts? Cuts to Medicare and Social Security to pay for his handouts for his rich buddies and corporations? Unacceptable. Next time you hear a Republican complaining about the deficit, remember, Donald Trump is the king of debt.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. My name is Brittany Page from the Page Perspective here on YouTube, and it's been a pleasure to join you all today as we go through the day's headlines. David is truly a generous and kind person for giving other creators the opportunity to gain some new eyeballs, and I appreciate that so many in his audience also appreciate seeing a new face every once in a while, so thank you. While recording, this story broke after I'd previously done a segment on it, and these updates are just too important to skip. I genuinely believe this story is going to be a problem for Donald Trump. This is a follow-up related to the Arlington National Cemetery story. The New York Times is on it now, and we're learning more about the cemetery employee that was involved in the altercation. with Trump's team, as well as family members of a fallen soldier who is concerned about Trump's decision to use the cemetery as a backdrop for his political campaign. Remember when that NPR reporter noted in the photo used by the Trump campaign that there were 2 additional graves visible, in addition to the fallen soldier's family who invited Trump to the cemetery? He noted that those families of the additional 2 graves, that they did not consent to Trump's use of this photo, and that it would become a problem.
In one of the photos that's widely circulating and being used by the Trump campaign, former President Trump is with family members of a fallen soldier. But to the left and the right of that soldier's grave, you can see 2 other tombstones. And it seems fairly clear that neither of those families has given consent for the Trump campaign to use these photographs. And that's incredibly painful for these families. And many of them are still grieving the loss of their loved one.
Well, he was right. Even as Donald Trump wasted no time creating a TikTok video for his campaign, including the photo, we're now hearing from the family of a soldier who is buried in the cemetery, where Donald Trump had this photo op. According to reporting from the New York Times, the family of a Green Beret who died by suicide after serving 8 combat tours and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery expressed concern on Wednesday that Donald J. Trump's campaign had filmed his gravesite without permission, as Mr. Trump stood in an area where campaign photography isn't allowed. Relatives of Master Sergeant Andrew Marchesano issued their statement 2 days after Mr. Trump's visit. Sergeant Marchesano died on July 7, 2020, after moving to Washington to begin a job at the Pentagon. He had 3 children, and friends said he had chronic post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in combat. He earned silver and bronze stars during his service. His gravesite is adjacent to that of Staff Sergeant Darren Taylor Hoover, a Marine who was killed in the 2021 bombing at the Abbey Gate outside the Kabul airport in Afghanistan. The Hoover family is the family who invited Trump to the cemetery. Now, this is horrible, tragic. This is something this family does not need. They do not need Donald Trump using their family member's grave as a backdrop in a campaign video on TikTok. So this is yet another example of Donald Trump's disregard and disrespect of the military. And how many more instances can Republicans ignore, and not just ignore, but defend? We're also learning about the cemetery employee who was involved in the confrontation. Quote, a woman who works at the cemetery filed an incident report with the military authorities over the altercation. But the official, who has not been identified, later declined to press charges. Military officials said she feared Mr. Trump's supporters pursuing retaliation. Of course, that makes total sense. Listen, as a woman who talks about politics on the internet and right now has an open investigation into credible death threats and rape threats that I've received from a Trump supporter, I understand this fear. But this isn't normal. A Republican presidential candidate's team abusing an employee at a military ceremony and cemetery who is trying to enforce federal law preventing the candidate from using that cemetery as a backdrop for a political ad, who is trying to protect families who did not consent to this? Where is Marine J.D. Vance in all of this? Still making excuses?
Kamala Harris is so asleep at the wheel that she won't even do an investigation into what happened, and she wants to yell at Donald Trump because he showed up. She can go to hell.
Kamala can go to hell? Is she the one disrespecting military families left and right? Enough with the games. Let's deal with reality on reality's terms here. Donald Trump is going toe-to-toe with yet another military family, and we know which side Republicans will take. One story I've been following closely is the aggressive homeless encampment sweeps in California, especially in San Francisco. Cities are taking the permission granted by the June Supreme Court decision in Grants Pass v. Johnson to criminalize homelessness. This was a 6-3 ruling that found cities can ban people from sleeping in public spaces. The conservative majority overturned a lower court ruling that determined punishing homeless people who have nowhere else to go, who are sleeping outside, is cruel and unusual punishment. With this new ruling from the Supreme Court, cities are ramping up attacks on homeless people who have nowhere else to go. And this is even in blue states. This is in blue cities. We're talking about Democratic leaders like Governor Gavin Newsom leading the charge, San Francisco Mayor London Breed. We're starting to hear now from advocates on the ground who are witnessing these sweeps, who are making it clear that they do not help the ultimate goal of getting a person off the streets. And that's because it creates more instability. I mean, imagine your source of stability is ripped away from you, as is literally the case in many of these sweeps, when government officials appear, sometimes announced, sometimes not, throwing away tents, throwing away medications, essential documents. These sweeps are inhumane, and they ultimately do nothing to solve homelessness. You cannot fine or arrest your way out of this crisis. And one advocate in particular, Jennifer Friedenbach, the executive director of the Coalition on Homelessness, appeared on CBS News to give her take.
Is really just moving people across the street and back, and not being successful in putting large numbers of people into shelter and housing. And that's really what you want. You want to get people off the streets.
And this is what we want. Inevitably, when I talk about this issue, people will come into the comments saying, well, we need to do something. I agree. We need to do something. We need to get people housed, not assault them and rip their belongings away from them on the street. And San Francisco is not getting people housed. I want to highlight this reporting from the LA Times. Quote, but San Francisco, along with many other West Coast cities looking to crack down on encampments, still hasn't figured out where people are supposed to go once their tents are dismantled. The city's shelters, with roughly 3,600 beds, are at 94% of capacity, according to the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Quote, unfortunately, San Francisco does not have enough shelter or housing for every person experiencing homelessness, but we do have some beds available each day to support the work of the outreach teams, and we continue to grow our system, Emily Cohen, the department spokesperson, wrote in an email. So this is the problem. There isn't enough housing. There isn't enough affordable housing or permanent supportive housing. And this is all happening in the same month that evictions in San Francisco are returning to pre-pandemic levels. Until we address the housing affordability crisis and help people stay in their housing, help people get stably housed, we're going to continue to see this problem grow. And in my work as a therapist, I've worked with this population. I still weekly work at an inpatient psychiatric hospital. And so this issue is very close to my heart, but it should be something that we all feel connected to. And I want to hear from Jennifer Friedenbach again on this, because she said something that I really love.
This is going to mean that they're going to get fines and fees that they can't pay. It's going to mean that they're going to get cited for things that they have no other choice but to be out here. And so it's just not a way to there's never been a ticket that has led somebody off the streets.
What Jennifer wants to see is a concerted effort to convert some of the vacant downtown buildings into housing for the homeless. It's policies like that she believes will actually help both clean up the streets and get people back on their feet.
A tent is a piece of fabric. Who's inside that tent is a human being.
A tent is a piece of fabric. Who's inside that tent is a human being. I love that. Something we need to remember. It's easy to see an unhoused person as other, but we need to center systems in this discussion, systemic failures that are not keeping our people healthy and housed. We can fix these things if only we build class solidarity and push for it. If you agree, I'd love to have you join me on my channel where I talk a lot about these issues, but also many other things too. And if you don't agree, join my comments anyway, because it helps the algorithm. The algorithm doesn't know if you're loving the content, hating the content. They just know that you're engaging with it, and that's all that matters. So thank you so much for allowing me to join you today as guest host for the David Pakman Show. I want to again give a shout out to David and his team for their generosity. If you are a member, you'll also see me on the bonus show. Yes, the bonus show where David wants to make money. I can hear the Alex Jones drop now. And I will be joined by Jesse Dollamore on the bonus show, so be sure to check that out. And hey, Thank you again. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. 8 Sleep makes a product that is amazing, which I love. It's called the Pod, and it fits around your existing mattress and cools down your bed so you can sleep better. They just released the newest model called the Pod 4 Ultra, which in addition to cooling down or heating up your bed, can even lift up your head when you're snoring so you can breathe better. It's incredible. To get $350 off, go to 8sleep.com/Pacman and use code Pacman. The link is in the description.